Top U.S. authorities say they stopped migrants trying to cross the southern border nearly 209,000 times during the month of August alone. According to new data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, that's just a 2% drop from the month prior. Border apprehensions reached a 21-year high in July, following sharp increases throughout the spring. So I want to bring in Nicole Sganga for more on this. So we're hearing about these numbers, these encounters, Nicole, but what do they really mean? Who do they really represent? What's the breakdown? Families, single adults, unaccompanied migrant children?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. The number of apprehensions of undocumented migrants attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border has dropped slightly compared to last month's 21-year high. You'll remember that record. But these numbers do remain high, with U.S. authorities encountering migrants nearly 209,000 times in August. Now, single migrant adults, you mentioned, they were stopped over 103,000 times on the U.S.-Mexico border. That's about a 7% drop from July. And this is a group where we routinely see a high rate of recidivism. So in other words, people attempting to cross the border multiple times. About roughly 75% of these stops by U.S. Border Patrol lead to very quick expulsions under a policy called Title 42, that Trump-era public health edict that the Biden administration has maintained. But encounters of migrant families with children did increase by 4% in August. More than 86,000 parents and children traveling as families entered into U.S. custody, and 80% of them were permitted to seek U.S. humanitarian protection right here. Also dipping just slightly, the number of unaccompanied migrant children taken into U.S. custody, still high, still more than 18,800 unaccompanied minors in August, most of them from Central America entering into the U.S. Now that's slightly below last month's high, but we should note that we're seeing more migrants and asylum seekers arriving from beyond Central America and Mexico in August, making up about 29% of the total arrests here, including many individuals from Ecuador, Cuba, Venezuela, Brazil. And according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, a full quarter of August's arrests represent migrants who had been previously taken into the United States and then sent back.
Wow. Okay, so that's the southern border. But the U.S. is also now trying to figure out how to resettle tens of thousands of Afghan evacuees. The Wisconsin State Journal reports that inside a Fort McCoy military base in western Wisconsin, there are Afghan evacuees saying that they are waiting in line for food for hours, that they're often wearing the same clothes day after day. Some of the women say they're being harassed by Afghan men, and they have no idea what the timeline is for resettlement. So as we know, many of these evacuees have been taken to military installations where they will sort of be vetted, and there'll be health checks and all that sort of stuff before going on to the next phase. But what are conditions like inside these DoD military installations?
Anne-Marie, taking a step back, there are 8 of these military installations with the capacity to house just over 60,000 asylum seekers or vulnerable Afghans. Now, Fort McCoy, the one you mentioned in western Wisconsin, it's the largest facility. It can house about 13,000, and it's near capacity right now based on government data that's been obtained by CBS News. More than 1 in 5 evacuees currently at a U.S. military base has landed at this facility in Wisconsin. Now, as of yesterday, there were nearly 150 pregnant women at Fort McCoy, according to that government data. The total population did grow after 2 healthy twins were born on base. But again, we're hearing complaints and concerns about food quality, quantity, and the timeliness. That remains a challenge. In fact, CBS News has learned about 300 Afghan evacuees at Holloman Air Force Base, another base, have engaged in a food protest this week after portions became substandard. A lot of migrants here are eager to apply from work, and also hearing from some that access to Wi-Fi is limited. Evacuees and staff tell us that additional medical services and counseling is needed. Consider some of the trauma these evacuees have gone through, as well as more culturally competent facilities. Now, the U.S. government in response says they're working on improving some of the conditions inside these military installations. Secretary Mayorkas even conceding to a small group of us reporters last week that the rollout here has not been perfect. So we are expected to see some of those improvements being made in the coming months.
Well, that's at least a little bit of good news. I want to ask you about some reporting that you have. There is continued concern about the threat of domestic violent extremists to Afghan evacuees and immigrant communities. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so as thousands, tens of thousands of these evacuated Afghans prepare to rebuild their lives in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security issued an intelligence bulletin last week, basically about a potential uptick in the number of grievances by domestic violent extremists. They're seeing some of this online chatter that could lead some to commit violence. Now, the assessment issued last week by the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis cautioned that, white supremacist groups and racially motivated extremists might target individuals or groups they perceive to have been relocated, like these evacuees, those assisting in this relocation, as well as possible other refugee communities that are unrelated. And it's interesting because after we published this story, Anne-Marie, we've been continuing to monitor this, and we've heard from immigration officials, in fact, some involved in the relocation of Afghans, others who have just worked in immigration for quite a long time, who have cited threats made to their organization, to their person. In fact, Secretary Mayorkas even told reporters that he actually himself has personally received similar threats. And, we do know there have been some concrete, changes made to shore up security at some of these DoD military installations. We're talking about a handful of Virginia state troopers, for instance, were assigned to protection of Fort Pickett this week. But DHS intelligence officials continue to stress that there is no specific credible threat here, but it remains a concern, that history will bear its ugly head again, and that anti-immigrant sentiments that we have seen unfold, and lead to these acts of mass violence. We saw it during the El Paso shooting, the Pulse nightclub shooting, will repeat themselves. So that's really the concern here.
And the absolute last thing these people need, who are already probably traumatized from the journey to the U.S., to believe that there may be another threat just outside of the walls where they're staying. Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you.